I would like to welcome all of our viewers out there to this program under the Community Forum Productions. This morning we're talking about the planning board actions, and I'm here to introduce our town planner. I'm Joe Scardino, chairman of the planning board, and your host for today's program. I am pleased to have with us our recently hired town planner, John Charbonneau, who's been with us about 4 weeks, getting his feet wet in all of the issues facing the town and being examined, worked on, and the subject of hearings and projects at the planning board. Without further ado, John comes to us with a very extensive background in planning. He's been at several of the communities around us, and I'm going to ask John to tell us a little bit about him. John?
Thanks, Joe. So I've been doing municipal planning for about 20 years, a little over 20 years, and I received my bachelor's degree from Clark University in 1992 and my master's degree in urban regional planning from East Tennessee State University in 1995. Previous to this, I worked with the towns of Walpole, Rentham, and Rainham most recently, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to be working for the town.
Thank you very much. I think you also had some experience at OCPC, am I correct?
Yes, I did spend 5 years as a transportation planner. Earlier in my career, I started out with the city of Brockton back in 1998 and then moved over to transportation planning for a short time.
And I only mention that because Old Colony Planning Council is a source of a lot of technical assistance and grants that we get, and it's good to know that we have someone on board that has a connection with the staff at OCPC. John, with your varied planning background, can you talk about one of the some of your experience? One of the issues that's probably on the minds of most of our residents is the rehabilitation and repurposing of the town square. Mm-hmm. And I understand that you've had some experience in this area, and I'd like you to discuss how you approached a similar problem in a neighboring community for our viewers.
Sure. So when I worked for the town of Rentham, one of the most pressing issues there was a property in the town center, 50 acres of vacant land that was most recently the Crosby Valve factory site. One of the first things I did was reach out to the property owners and meet with them to find out what their vision for the property was, and luckily it was in line with the town's vision for the property, and so we went about the task of rezoning the property to fit the town's and the developer's vision for the property.
Well, could you talk a little bit about specifically what zoning changes,
Sure.
what the before was and what the planning board needed to propose in order to facilitate the development that you're going to be showing us?
Yes. So originally when I got there, the property was zoned Commercial 1, and it's the type of zoning that was appropriate for a large factory such as the Crosby Valve site. It's also similar to other zoning areas in Rentham along Route 1, along Route 140 near the Franklin town line, and along Route 1A near the Norfolk town line. There was talk of doing an overlay district. However, people get confused with the terms overlay district and the various regulations. So we decided to rezone the property, and the advantage of that is with its own unique zoning for the town center, if the zoning needed to be changed at some point in the future, it wouldn't affect other areas of town like it would with the C1 district. Also, we found that the C1 district, the uses allowed there weren't compatible with the town center. For example, they would allow warehousing, big box retail, car dealerships, things of that nature, things that were really intensive to be at a town center. So, yes.
And we also, you're aware, we have a statute called an overlay district, and most people know it as the SHMOOD, the
Yes.
Stoughton Center Mixed Use Overlay District. So can you mention the difference between the zoning that you're facing here in Stoughton and the zoning that you face there?
Well, it's a little bit different because of the fact that Rentham, this was 50 acres of vacant land. So it was almost like a clean slate once we rezoned the property. And we had a developer that was willing to work with the town. So it worked out really, really well. So it was a very rare opportunity that not a lot of towns have. Most town centers, such as Stoughton, don't have 50 acres of vacant land that they can start with a clean slate and determine what they want to do. So what you're faced with in Stoughton, some of the similarities are, traffic concerns. I know that Stoughton Center has faced traffic concerns for years, back to my days at Old Colony Planning Council. So that's one similarity between Rentham and Stoughton. But again, the difference is Stoughton doesn't have 50 acres of vacant land to start with a clean canvas. You're talking about redevelopment of existing sites. You have the commuter rail and the commuter rail parking right near your town center. So that presents certain challenges for the town in trying to move forward with changes to the zoning and changes to land use in the downtown. So you're talking about reuse of properties rather than new construction.
Plus you're talking about quite a few different landowners. I suspect that
Yes.
that provides more challenge to trying to get a uniform development in the square.
It does, and not only do you have multiple landowners, but you have smaller lots. So you have a lot more potential versatility developing on 50 acres of vacant land than you do developing multiple small properties. So one of the solutions eventually, if depending on the type of development the town wants to attract to the town center, it could be combining properties together to be able to get a certain type of development rather than having multiple small parcels.
And with respect to the Rentham project, how did you proceed with the zoning, and what was the community reaction to those changes?
Well, then after we analyzed the current zoning, we had a concept for how the town would want the property laid out, with more compact residential as a buffer at the rear of the site, transitioning to compact residential but a little bit more dense, and then mixed use closer to the town center to, again, give some buffer to existing residential neighborhoods at the rear of the property. So we attained grants through the local technical assistance program of MAPC in Boston, and their staff was wonderful. We established a committee comprised of representation from the Planning Board, the Board of Selectmen, the Economic Development Commission, and also some at-large residents who own properties around the town center, and also the engineer for the developer who owns the acreage was also on that panel, because we wanted to work in a team environment. We wanted to work in coordination with the developer, because even though the town and residents may have wanted certain land uses on that property, his knowledge of the market area for certain uses was invaluable. For instance, a lot of the town wanted a supermarket on that property. However, in putting out the word to the private sector, the engineer was able to tell us that there was not an interest in supermarket on this property for the reasons of being surrounded by other similar uses in Franklin and Plainville and Bellingham, and also the location. Although it was a high traffic location, it wasn't close to the highway, it wasn't very visible. So that type of information was very useful as the town sought to rezone the property. So as the committee met over a period of time with MAPC staff, what they decided was that they would establish a new district called a village district.
Now, do you have an exhibit to show the,
Yes.
and
Yes, I believe it's exhibit number 3, shows that's the original zoning up there. That started out as commercial 1 with business 1 along Route 1A. Next slide, please. Thank you. That is what you see there is the vision of the transition from residential to mixed use near the town center as you get away from those residential zoning districts in the rear. On the left, you see a cul-de-sac that comes up to the property. That's Cesar Celler Drive. And to the north, you see another residential road off of Route 140. That's called Archer Road, and it goes out to Lake Archer. Next slide, please. And then we get to the vision for the new zoning with a village district and with the 50 acres that were zoned C1 becoming subdistrict B, and then the area that's currently zoned business 1 becoming subdistrict B. I'm sorry, subdistrict A.
when you, there are some similarities to the Stoughton situation because the core of the downtown was destined for mixed use. We have one fully permitted project located dead center in the center that some people know as the Malcolm Parsons project. So that was designated as mixed use. There are also 2 permitted, actually at this stage it's 3 permitted projects in the housing area on Porter Street. The old Frager's Market site is in the process. In fact, if you go down Porter Street, you'll see that the facade is almost all up. That same developer is also doing a project on Monk Street, again very similar in structure and character to the one that he built on the corner of Monk and Washington, and somewhat similar to the Frager's Market project. So those are 3. Now the one on Frager's and the one on Monk Street are solely housing. The one on Washington Street is mixed use with retail and commercial on the first floor and housing on the upper 2 floors. And I guess I'm pleased to notify our viewers that I've been given to understand by the building commissioner that the owners of that property have initiated the process for a demolition permit to take down the rest of the existing building, as well as the properties in the corner of Freeman and Washington, which consisted largely of the old Malcolm Parsons Insurance Company, hence the name of that's put on the project. But it's not the Malcolm Parsons entity that's developing the property. It's Connolly Development. And so we will be keeping you abreast, and actually you'll be able to visually see the results. And for those people wondering what will exist there, the poster in front of the street area is the rendering of the building that you should see hopefully soon. Sorry to digress, but I wanted to mention a few similarities to between the Rentham project and the Stoughton Center. I didn't continue on your discussion, John.
So after meeting for probably close to 1.5 years and spending lots of time poring over the existing zoning and the proposed zoning and going through the use table and trying to determine what uses would be appropriate, coming up with design guidelines, and also the permitting procedure. There was definitely some concern in terms of the neighbors, especially the residents on Cesar Celler Drive, in terms of the potential for their cul-de-sac to become a through road once the project was built. So we took certain measures going into town meeting to protect the residents on Cesar Celler Drive by rezoning a little strip of land on the edge of the property. If you could pull up the slides, please, that were up before. Yes, as you can see to the left, Cesarcella Drive is a cul-de-sac that ends right on the property boundary. However, the assessor's maps do show the continuation of a paper street onto the property. So as a show of good faith, what we ended up doing is rezoning a small strip of property 25 feet wide along the edge of that property that was zone C1 and rezoned it to residential. So now that road could never become a throughway because you cannot build an access road between residential and commercial over a residential piece of property.
So was there actually a taking involved by the town?
No, nope, because that property belonged to the new owner, Galaxy Development, and they allowed us to do that. They were in agreement because they wanted to protect the neighbors as well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. This shows the vision that the town and the developer potentially had for the build-out of the property. You can see the grid pattern of roads. To the south there, you see Route 1A, and to the right of the picture, that's Route 140 that goes off to King Philip High School and Franklin. So this is right at the corner near the town center. So you see the potential for a grid pattern, and then go to the next slide, please. Then potentially for another couple of blocks up above that. So this was the potential for development of the site, and MAPC staff was wonderful in bringing conceptual plans of potential build out of the property, and the first 2 or 3 actually got rejected by the committee developing this zoning because they simply felt it wasn't compatible for the town of Rentham, for the nature of the downtown and the character. So it was a little bit too dense. So they scaled it down a little bit and finally came to a design that worked. And next slide, please. So in there you have the completed vision potentially for build out of the property, with the residential up at the rear of the property, and as you move more towards the intersection of Route 1A and Route 140, you get more into the mixed use. So there was also extensive outreach done. Once the bylaw was established, the procedure was that the developer of this property would come forward with a master plan to the planning board and present it to the planning board at a public hearing. And then the planning board would have a chance to give its approval or its denial. And once they approved a master plan for the build out of the property, they would then submit a full application for site plan approval and special permit to come back for a second public hearing to actually approve the project itself. So it was actually a 2-tiered approval process. And that was unique, and no other zoning district in the town of Rentham had that in place. So that gave another level of protection and review to kind of put the residents at ease that this would get a thorough review when the time comes. And did a lot of public outreach. We did a community forum back in December of 2018 it would be. And we presented the draft bylaws. The residents seemed to be happy with the progress and the direction. So we went back, and then we did another public forum in September right before town meeting, and there were over 100 people at the public library, and it was very well attended, got a lot of positive feedback, and went to town meeting, and it was passed nearly unanimously by a vote of, I believe, of 270 to 12. So it was a very large turnout because they have open town meeting in Rentham. So the hard work that was done and the public outreach that was done, and I think the secret to success was dealing with the concerns of the residents out front and being transparent with the process and hearing the criticisms, hearing the concerns, and not shying away from them. And I think that built a lot of trust and a lot of good faith with those residents, and it was reflected in the vote at town meeting.
The question I have, did the planning board, as you recall, and I understand it was a while ago, put any further mitigation and or requirements to the project that you remember, as far as between what the developer proposed and what you were hearing from the community?
Well, what the developer proposed at the time was only a concept. It was a general concept. There wasn't actually a project. They couldn't move forward until we had the zoning in place, first of all. Second of all, Galaxy Development, the 50 acres is divided into two different parcels. A 20-acre parcel closer to Route 1A, which Galaxy Development owned at the time. The other 30 acres to the rear of the property were actually owned by FMC Corporation out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So the intent was, once the zoning was in place, that Galaxy Development would enter into negotiations with FMC to purchase the other 30 acres, therefore having control of the entire site. That's where it was left after town meeting, and to my knowledge, no project has come forward yet, so any specific mitigation relative to the project would be discussed at the public hearing when the time comes. So no specific mitigation was talked about, although in general people talked about potential traffic issues and the different access points to the property. So those are all things that will eventually be addressed at those public hearings.
And just to give the viewers some parameters as far as how long this took to the point where the zoning was approved, from the start of the visioning process internally. Can you give us some idea as to how long that process took?
It took over a year and a half. It probably took a year and a half to a year and 9 months. It was a very thorough process, but the feeling was by all involved that the town had one shot to get this right, and when, again, a unique opportunity to have 50 vacant acres right near your town center, you want to make sure you get it right. It doesn't mean it'll be perfect. There may be some tweaking involved somewhere down the road, potentially, but we want it to be as thorough as possible and do it right the first time and leave no stone unturned.
To your best of your knowledge, has anything been started as far as construction there?
No, there's been no construction started. I actually haven't been in touch with anyone in Rentham for a little while. I actually am curious to see if anything has come forward yet, so I probably will reach out to someone, either with the town or with Galaxy Development, and see where that stands.
So the process, the legislative process, took about a year and a half.
Yes.
And we're in 2019. When did that end, and where, in other words, how much time has passed since the inception of this project?
The zoning was actually approved at the November town meeting last year, November of 2018. So yes, so this process started in 2017, early 2017. So fall of 2018, the zoning was approved, and naturally, once you pass zoning bylaws amendments, changes at town meeting, the Attorney General has to review it, and they give you an answer after within 90 days, and usually they take the full 90 days. So the zoning wasn't officially approved by the Attorney General probably until about February of this year. So at that point, that's when negotiations could have potentially started between Galaxy Development and FMC. So I don't know where that stands right now, like I said, because I left Rentham probably about 9 months ago. So I would think that the negotiations may still be ongoing or close to completion. So again, I've been meaning to reach out and see where that stands.
The point was, I was trying to give our viewers some ideas to how that these things just don't happen bing, bang, boom.
No, they don't.
And I guess I have a question to you. In the concept plan, how did they address open space?
They addressed open space simply by creating a buffer along. If you could please pull up that last slide. The last slide shows the fully realized potential build out for the property, and you'll see open space. There you go. So if you look to the top of the screen, you see some open space to the south of the homes that front on Archer Street. And some of that is taken care of naturally, because if you see the water bodies up there, you naturally have water bodies and wetlands. So there's a natural wetland buffer there where nothing can be done. Also, if you look to the left of the screen, that little kind of panhandle, since Rentham doesn't have town sewer, the developer would have to put in a wastewater treatment facility. So that would be located over on that panhandle to the left, which would again create a little bit more of a buffer from the residential development. So you have those two aspects, and also you have some open space because of the fact that to the top of the property, to the top of the screen, the residential development wouldn't be as dense as it would be closer to the town center. So you had some natural things in place that would provide some open space, and also open space could be addressed again. The regulations are specific enough to lay out the process and the parameters. However, what's important with zoning bylaw amendments is to not make them so strict and so tight that the planning board doesn't have flexibility to work with the developer.
And do you recall any particular provisions that were put into that bylaw that allowed the planning board some discretion with respect to the zoning
Yes.
requirements? And what were those?
Basically, making the planning board, first of all, the permit granting authority for the site plan approval and special permit. And
can I just ask
Yes.
you there, because I think that there's, certainly my experience at town meeting is there's a lack of understanding, I think, as to the type of analysis that the planning board has to undergo with respect to a special permit. Could you discuss some of the criteria that go into that,
Yes.
that are required?
certainly, when someone applies for a special permit, they have to meet certain criteria with the project they're building. The project they're building can't create issues with noise, dust, odors, general pollution, different types of pollution for the surrounding area. Under special permit, they have to do the best they can to maintain the existing topography and not do too much earth removal. So there are certain thresholds and certain criteria that the developer has to meet, and if they exceed those thresholds, then that could be potentially a reason for the planning board to deny a special permit.
And I believe also the analysis of the supporting infrastructure that's in place there
Correct.
as to whether the capacity of sewer and water could support such a project is also, and
Traffic.
the traffic as well as public safety.
Yes.
The ability of public safety to service those projects.
Correct. And all of that also plays into the potential effect it has on surrounding property values. The project can't have a negative effect on surrounding property values. Drainage is part of that, stormwater runoff. The project is not allowed to have stormwater runoff onto abutting properties. Now, if there is current stormwater that runs off of the subject property to abutting properties, the developer isn't responsible for correcting that. However, the proposed development can't make the situation worse.
So, in other words, there's quite a few issues that have to be addressed before a planning board. It's just not a up or down vote.
Correct. And when you ask about the flexibility that was built into the regulations in Rentham, one thing that was discussed at length is giving the developer and the planning board flexibility to work together. For instance, when we came up with design guidelines at the time, we talked about building facade treatments and the appearance to be consistent with the character of the town center. One word that tends to make people cringe in this part of the country, for instance, is stucco. People don't like to hear the word stucco. The image people get of stucco is tacky, not very New Englandish, not very colonial. However, in the private sector, developers are doing some very, very creative things with stucco and concrete. For instance, there was a developer who is currently doing a housing project near the town center in Walpole, and he wanted to use limestone because limestone is native to Walpole and prevalent in Walpole. However, actual limestone is very porous and tends to break down in rain and moisture and runs. So they are using concrete to replicate the look of limestone. So the idea is if you give the planning board and the developer a little bit of flexibility to be creative and to work together, you actually can come out with a better product as opposed to restricting the use of things like stucco and concrete.
And so you would be in favor of a requirement that keeps existing zoning but allows for the planning board through the special permit process to mitigate a requirement in the bylaw at the board's discretion.
Absolutely, because people get elected to the planning board, in certain towns appointed to the planning board for reasons. For certain reasons, they're professionals in their own fields. They bring different areas of expertise to the table, sometimes in regard to engineering or law. So to have these individuals bring the diverse experience, that's why people are elected to town boards and appointed to town boards, is because they bring certain skills, certain knowledge, certain background to the table. So if you allow those volunteers some discretion and trust them to use their discretion, then you can come out with very good results.
Turning our attention towards the current town center, I'm just going to bring up, because you haven't participated in any of the discussions for projects in the square, but I'll tell you some of the barriers that we've encountered. Our downtown is perhaps more traditional looking downtown as opposed to the one that you had in Rentham that had a lot of open space naturally. And you used it wisely, appears, as a buffer between the residential neighborhoods and the proposed development. And Mother Nature, because of the wetlands, also provided a further buffer. But the way the Stoughton Mixed Use Overlay District is created, the core district is the A district, which we've been focusing on that for years. That's the central business district downtown. The surrounding neighborhood is referred to as the B district. And there hasn't been much development. In fact, I don't recall any projects at all in the B development since I've been on the planning board. So most of the development has been as I said, in the main corridor. And that resembles more, I think you would agree with me, as a more traditional downtown, which you expect buildings to be close together with little or no setbacks. Everybody likes to have open space because it serves as a buffer, and it highlights the project. But in our particular case, we don't have much opportunity for that. And the other problem that we've discovered is the building heights being a barrier, in the sense that if you have a commercial building on the first floor, the HVAC units need a ceiling height that's much higher than a residential ceiling height. So our current bylaw has a 40-foot maximum on that, which can't be waived. And so we found that that's been a challenge both for the planning board as well as builders, because they're trying to get, and there's nothing wrong with this, economic value out of the site, and but trying to put 4 stories in 40 feet is a problem because they need more than 10 feet. Right. So I just like you to comment a little bit on your perspective on the need to both consider the town's policy and the control of those versus a meritorious project that might come forward that's economically and financially challenged by the requirement of, for example, of 10% open space.
That's interesting that you mention that, because a lot of towns struggle with this issue where they have areas that are zoned for commercial or business, but when you look at the land use in reality, what's on the ground, and sometimes there's a lack of development. So any town has to look at these zones where they want to encourage business and commercial development. And if they're not getting that commercial business development, you have to ask, over a certain amount of time, you have to ask why. What is it about the regulations for that district that are holding developers back? It could be things like dimensional regulations, building height, ceiling height. It could be minimum lot size. Is the minimum lot size too big for the nature of the area? One thing that Rentham also ran to was along Route 1. 2.3 miles of road on Route 1A are in Rentham, and they currently have 7 different zoning districts. And part of the problem was, and a lot of towns do this, is they created their zoning based on what they wanted to keep out, and rather than what they wanted to allow in. So at the end of the day, the one thing that Rentham doesn't want on Route 1 is the easiest thing to do, which is a junkyard, because of physical constraints, because of dimensional constraints, and I had several
Aesthetics.
developers, exactly. I had several developers approach me during my time in Rentham to complain about the strict dimensional regulations in the C1 district along Route 1, that the lot coverage was too restrictive. By the time you get done with wetlands, and because there's no town sewer with the septic system or treatment facility, by the time you remove all the setback dimensional regulations and the physical restraints, constraints, and the fact that the lot coverage wasn't just building coverage, it was all impervious, you're left with very little of the site that can be developed. So those are things that definitely need to be considered, is what do you hope to accomplish in that zoning district, and do the current regulations encourage it, or do they discourage it? So it's something that definitely needs to be looked at and tweaked if you're not getting the desired development in that district.
Well, for example, my understanding is we have a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size in the Schmood. Now, again, just to explain to people that that district is an overlay, meaning that a developer could come in and use the existing underlying zoning. What the planning board in 2006, in conjunction with MAPC, and by the way, just a little aside, we've been throwing around the acronyms of OCPC and MAPC. These refer to regional planning agencies. They're quasi-government agencies that serve to distribute technical assistance and other transportation-related grants. And the town of Stoughton, for example, we have millions of dollars worth of projects that come through under the TIP program that are administered and granted through the regional planning agencies. So when we mention them, they're an integral partner in our economic, financial, and land use development in the town. So just so that you understand when we use those expressions, what we're talking about. But back to the 10,000 minimum lot requirement. And so that's coupled with a 10% open space requirement, which under our bylaw requires you can't use it for parking. It has to be open to the sky, meaning you can't use an atrium in a building, which the city of Boston has open space and lobbies that they have atriums. If you go to one international place, you'll see a nice fountain in the middle of that building with a promenade of stores that are inside, with inside access to the public. So you're talking, before you even develop, you really have 9,000 square feet of developable space.
And it's interesting, when you mention overlay districts, part of what makes overlay districts tricky is, yeah, you have an overlay district with certain regulations, but the underlying district regulations still apply. So if you have underlying regulations in the base district that are too restrictive, then it can render your overlay district ineffective. So I'm not saying this is the case here in Stoughton, but that is a possibility. So your underlying zoning is still the foundation of your zoning, and if that's too restrictive or if that's ineffective, then an overlay district can be ineffective as well.
And if you have the overlay district being tying the hands of both the planning board and the developer in trying to work fitting a square peg into a round hole, it's kind of a double negative.
Correct.
Is there anything else that we can learn from the Rentham example that might be relevant to our Stoughton project?
One thing that I took from it is to not eliminate the private sector in the development of bylaws, because when Rentham started the process of developing the zoning here, they had certain uses in mind that they really thought would be great there, such as a supermarket. However, if the market conditions aren't right and the location isn't just right, then you're not going to be able to get your desired use in that location. So it doesn't mean that you give away the farm or you let developers have anything they want. However, there isn't a value in paying attention to and listening to developers with what's going on in the private sector, because you can turn a blind eye to that if you'd like. However, it could be to your detriment, because ultimately you could have an idea for the zoning and what you want, but it may not be feasible. So there's a certain amount of open-mindedness that goes along with creating and developing and changing zoning.
And I can recall a couple of instances. One I learned from a seminar that I went to. The planning board members, many of which go to the Holy Cross Citizens Planning Training Collaborative seminars. And one example there was out in Western Mass, where I think it was Holyoke, that they did a visioning exercise, and the town wanted an artist colony on the river out there. And they hired a marketing company, and they found that no artists want to relocate to that,
Exactly.
into Holyoke. So you're absolutely right about making sure that the market forces, for example, the several people have mentioned to me and other members of the planning board that they'd rather see condominiums as opposed to apartments. But the way the market's working, with very few millennials wanting home ownership, that the housing becomes more transient because of the barriers in terms of down payments and career movement, that
Right.
they tend to be more, have more career mobility than
Flexibility.
and so the apartment type housing lends itself more to that particular type of housing plan. And in my hometown in upstate New York, the state and the city developed a hockey rink in the middle of town, which ended up being mothballed. And their idea was that the hockey rink would facilitate the development of restaurants. And so they ended up with neither, and the hockey rink was mothballed. So you're right about making sure that sometimes if you build a better mousetrap, they will seek you out. Doesn't necessarily work in the...
Right, and the other aspect that I would encourage people to keep in mind is what I mentioned before about, using Route 1 in Rentham as an example. So many towns, they develop their zoning or amend their zoning based on what they don't want. And I think that thinking can be flawed. I think the better way to go about it is think of what you want to attract, think of what you want to bring in, and then develop or amend your zoning based on that. I think that is more likely than not a more effective way to do it.
And to provide some flexibility in your zoning through special permits to allow the planning board to work with the statute. And one of the things that I have found good about the special permit approach is that if you get a project that you don't want because it has an extreme burden on town resources, it's particularly invasive to the neighborhood, if you were to legislate those changes, you would have to by right give that particular project an okay.
Right.
And are you in agreement with that philosophy, that you don't always want to have by right zoning?
Exactly. But a certain amount of by right zoning is okay, because you don't want to make your zoning bylaws too arduous and put up too many hurdles. So you want to be particular and you want to be selective with your by right zoning. And that's one of the issues that Rentham has run into, is there's very little allowed by right in Rentham other than single family homes in certain areas. Pretty much anything that gets permitted in Rentham is through a special permit and site plan approval. So what I would encourage is site plan approval is more of a mechanism of the scope of the project rather than the actual use.
We have one other topic to discuss very briefly, and then we have to have some announcements. At town meeting this year, there was a bylaw that was presented for senior housing. And during my presentation on that bylaw, I had asked town meeting, and they obliged the planning board on this, was to reject the proposal that was made by a developer to change the zoning. And in line with that, we agreed to conduct an analysis with the public. And luckily, that need to conduct the public analysis, as well as a state requirement that the town update its housing plan, coincided. So I guess in the few minutes we have left, I'd like to have you talk about what the housing production plan that is the responsibility of the planning board is all about, and why we need to update this, and what are the benefits for the town. If you could do so, John.
Yeah, sure. Housing production plan is similar to a master plan, similar to a long-range plan with other disciplines such as traffic, transportation. It simply lays out the goals and objectives of the town when it comes to future housing, both the types of housing that the town would like to see developed, also the locations where the town would like certain types of housing, and it provides a map as far as how the town can get there. And right now the town has an active accepted housing production plan that is set to expire, I believe, at the end of this year, late this year. So the town has been working with Old Colony Planning Council on amending and updating the housing production plan, which is underway. And that's very important because the benefits obviously are having a map and a way to create diversity in housing and satisfy the housing needs for town residents. But also there are some things that the town can gain, such as accessibility to various grant programs with the state. I know that there's certain, the sewer project that is being paid for through a MassWorks grant.
Well, we're in the process of, that's one of the sources of funding that was discussed during the article at town meeting for that. We have gotten many grants already, and just so you know, grants are state, extra state money above and beyond the so-called cherry sheet amounts that we get to balance our budget each year, in addition to the tax revenue that we get from residents owning real estate in the town, as well as commercial entities. So we cannot do our function as a municipality without some outside influence. We'd have to do overrides and debt exclusions.
And grant monies are continually more competitive because there used to be certain grant programs that are no longer available because they were kind of rolled into the MassWorks program. So another grant program is the Housing Choice Initiative. And by having an updated active housing production plan, it makes the town more competitive for these grants because they score these applications for grants based on points, and you get a certain amount of points for each aspect that the town satisfies, and having an active production plan is one of those point scoring items that is a feather in the town's cap to have. And not having an active housing production plan also leaves the town vulnerable to Chapter 40B housing projects, housing developments that may come before the Zoning Board of Appeals, where the town loses its protection against 40B housing, even though the town of Stoughton, from what I understand, is above 10%, because the town would lose its certification of that number with the Department of Housing and Community Development if we don't have an active housing production plan.
And a lot of people don't understand that one of the requirements that we've talked about, site plan approval in the Rentham example, we would not have the ability to have an active role in the design and mitigation of projects. So maintaining that percentage is extremely important. It gives the town control over the development of its natural and land resources and the types of projects that come in. Whereas we lose that local control if it goes below. Our producers are saying that we need to break for some commercial announcements, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit in the final minutes about the survey that's online that we'd like you to participate in, because it has some very important questions about the types of housing, in particular where senior housing would be located in town, whether it should be apartments or single-family homes. Should it be a cluster? Should it be a large, what the market value of those housing should be? And at this point, I guess I'd like to turn it over for our announcements of our sponsors.
Hi, this is Roy Cohen. The crew would like to thank Maxie's Delicatessen, located at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. You can reach them by calling 781-341-1662. The American Cancer Society is looking for volunteers to drive cancer patients to and from treatments. You can volunteer by calling 1-800-ACS-6662 or online at www.cancer.org. Ilse Mark's Food Pantry and St. Anthony's Free Market is located at 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. To get involved with Meals on Wheels, call Jessica at 781-344-8882, extension 2. The Stoughton Penny Saver. Our business is advertising your business in Stoughton. To advertise, call 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes here in Stoughton. You can see it on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m., either on Comcast Channel 9 or Verizon Channel 28. If you have any comments or suggestions, contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Samaritans, 41 West Street, 4th floor in Boston, Massachusetts, 02111, or call them at 617-536-2460. The 24-hour helplines, 877-870-HOPE or 877-870-4673. Samaritans, 800-252-TEEN or 800-252-8336, or online www.samaritans.hope.org. For you bingo players, I want to tell you about the Monday Night Bingo being held at the Ahava Torah Congregation, 1179 Central Street in Stoughton. The doors open at 4:30 p.m. The games start at 6:30 p.m. You come on down and win some money. They have 2 big prizes. One is $1,199 and the other one is up to $3,000. So come on down.
On Thursday and Friday evening from 4 to 8 p.m. I believe they're also allowing you to bring in your own beverages. Thank you. Back on to our program. We were talking about the housing production plan. And again, my panelist is John Charbonneau, our town planner. And we wanted to inform the viewers that we're engaging in a public outreach project to get your feedback into our housing production plan and why it should be of importance to you as a resident. During town meeting, there was a proposal to promote senior housing that wasn't well vetted and suited for the town. The town meeting rejected it. The planning board is in the process of trying to come back to town meeting with a proposal that's more widely accepted. So we would appreciate that if you would participate in the survey. It's a Survey Monkey. This is the link. We're also going to make it available at computer sites around town. I would ask that you consult the planning board site as well as the town website for other locations where you may be able to go in and use a town computer in order to do that. So again, the housing production plan has a lot of information that we'd like your feedback on. In particular, this housing production survey has a specific component on senior housing that we know is very important to both our seniors as well as the population as a whole that likes to respond by allowing the seniors to be able to have a place to stay in Stoughton and downsize their homes. On behalf of John Charbonneau, new town planner, and myself, we would like to thank Community Forum for this opportunity to inform you on an ongoing basis of some of the projects and concerns and happenings at the planning board. And in particular, in addition to thanking our host, we also like to thank the people that make the show possible. Special thanks to Michael Hammond, to Jeffrey Pickett, shout out to David Young, C.J. Mullen, our recent addition, Zach Castle, of course, our producer, Roy Cohen, our technical advisor, Gina Cohn, and best wishes to Leo McGowan, who usually is with us as the cameraman. Leo, we hope you're back with us soon. And on behalf of John Charbonneau and myself, Joe Scardino, Chair of the Planning Board, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this show on Community Forum. And stay tuned for our wonderful programs that are aired in this spot.